They told you it was your sibling, the jealous one, the lazy one, the golden one. But what if that was never the truth? What if the conflict between you wasn't accidental, but engineered? Because in narcissistic family systems, division isn't dysfunction, it's design. It's the hidden architecture of control. And if you don't name it, you'll keep mistaking a sibling for an enemy, when the real weapon was the story you inherited. Your brother always listens. Why can't you be more like her? Don't tell your sister, she wouldn't understand. These aren't random, they're micro-fractures in trust, strategically placed. So you grow up watching your sibling, not your parent. If you ever felt closer to competition than connection, if you were told your sibling was your rival, if your childhood felt like a performance to win proximity, this video is for you. We're going to uncover why narcissistic parents turn siblings into emotional enemies, how they weaponize birth order, approval, and perception to keep you divided, and what it takes to finally see your sibling not as the problem, but as someone who was cast in the same survival story as you. Because once you decode the roles, you stop resenting the person and start confronting the pattern. This is how narcissistic parents operate. They don't parent, they cast roles, they manufacture scarcity, and then they watch you fight over it. Why? Because as long as you're comparing, you won't be confronting. As long as you're competing, you won't be connecting. And as long as you're blaming each other, the system gets to survive. This is the dark genius of divide and conquer. It's not just a political strategy. It's a parenting tactic, designed to fragment the very people who might have healed each other. Your sibling was never the threat. They were collateral damage. But narcissistic parents can't afford unity, because unity brings clarity. Clarity brings questioning, and questioning threatens the entire illusion. Philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote, "The most radical revolutionary will become a conservative the day after the revolution." In narcissistic families, the revolution is connection, and the parent will do whatever it takes to keep that from happening. So they alternate praise and punishment. They create the good one and the difficult one. They reward silence and punish truth. They don't just divide, they narrate the division. And you, trying to survive, internalize it. They've always hated me. They always get everything. They're mum's favorite. They think they're better. But those aren't your words, they're echoes. Here's the psychological mechanism. When love is conditional, children will compete for it. Not because they're selfish, but because they're human. And in systems where approval is scarce, connection becomes a threat. That's not dysfunction. That's trauma economics. Because narcissistic parents don't offer love freely. They auction it. And the prize? Temporary closeness, at the cost of authentic sibling bond. So your sibling wasn't your rival. They were your reflection, trapped in the same performance, just in a different role. And that's what hurts the most, isn't it? That the person who could have been your ally was turned into your opponent. And now, you don't just have grief, you have guilt. Let's slow it down. Think back to your earliest memories of conflict. Was it about the toy? The grade? The seat at the table? Or was it about something deeper? Something invisible that felt like survival? Because if the roles were reversed, if you were the golden one and they were the scapegoat, would the story have played out any differently? This isn't about blame, it's about design. And the only way to break that design is to see it. Take a moment to reflect. When did you start believing your sibling was the enemy? And what were you being taught, rewarded, or punished for in that moment? Your parent didn't just raise you, they programmed you. And now, even years later, with space, therapy, and awareness, you still feel something tighten when your sibling enters the room. That's not personal. That's systemic residue. But it can be unlearned. If you're willing to trace the conflict back to its source, not each other, but the one who made you fight for love like it was limited. They lied. Your sibling was never the threat. The story was. And we're about to dismantle it. Narcissistic parents don't raise children, they orchestrate characters. Every praise, every punishment, every pointed silence is a narrative choice. And the goal isn't connection, it's control. This section unpacks the system beneath the story, the psychology behind the roles, and the structure that sustains them. In healthy families, children grow together. They may clash, but they're encouraged to relate, to repair, to root for each other. But in narcissistic families, closeness threatens the system, because closeness creates perspective, and perspective makes you dangerous. So instead, a different value is installed: comparison. A subtle but powerful incentive to monitor each other, compete for praise, and stay emotionally guarded. You learn early. Love is limited. Affection is earned. And safety belongs to whoever performs best. The narcissistic parent engineers a psychological economy where validation is the currency and scarcity keeps the game going. One child is praised for obedience. Another is punished for defiance. One is crowned the smart one. The other is the difficult one. But here's the truth. Those labels aren't reflections. They're reinforcements. Because each child's identity becomes a role, not chosen, but assigned, designed to serve the emotional regulation of the parent, not the development of the child. And so, the golden child performs to protect their value. The scapegoat resists and absorbs the blame. The lost child disappears to avoid the chaos. And all of them are alone. Philosopher Michel Foucault warned, "Power is not something that is acquired, it is exercised." This is exactly how narcissistic parents operate. They don't own control. They practice it, daily, subtly, repeatedly, until the dynamic feels natural, even to the children trapped inside it. They pit you against each other, not through open violence, but through psychological suggestion. A smirk, a sigh, a raised eyebrow when your sibling fails, a whisper of praise when you stay quiet, a reward for distance, a punishment for empathy. And over time, you begin to self-police, to track where you rank, to resent your sibling for what they have or for how they survive. But that's not your fault. It's the intended result. Here's what most people miss. This division doesn't end in childhood. It calcifies. You grow up with fractured trust, distorted memories, and a version of your sibling that was filtered through your parents' lens. Maybe they were weaponized against you. Maybe you were weaponized against them. Either way, the bond you could have had was replaced by an internal scoreboard. And even now, you still feel the residue. You compare, you tense, you judge. Not because you're petty, but because comparison was your native language. You were never taught how to be together. only how to win. Let's break it down. Narcissistic parents use a calculated blend of manipulation to divide their children, not through chaos, but through choreography. They assign their own flaws to one child while praising another for being the opposite. This projection turns the children into psychological mirrors, each one carrying a reflection that protects the parent from facing their own truth. At the same time, they manipulate communication. Instead of fostering direct connection, they become the gatekeeper, relaying messages through gossip, implication, or subtle rewrites. Trust becomes dangerous. Speaking freely becomes unsafe. And then there's the fixation on roles. Once you're cast, you don't get to grow. Any attempt to evolve, any shift in identity that threatens the system is met with correction, withdrawal, or punishment. But the most insidious part, it's not just the parent doing the punishing, it's the other siblings too, who feel their own access to love is being threatened the moment someone stops playing their part. That's what makes this so hard to heal. You're not just grieving a parent, you're grieving a sibling dynamic that never had a chance to be real. Pause here to reflect. When did you feel most distant from your sibling? And what role were you both playing in your parent's system at the time? Let's be clear, you didn't choose this structure, you adapted to it. And your sibling did too. But now that you can see it, you have a choice they never gave you. To step out of role, to stop performing, to stop policing yourself and your sibling through the lens of an old, rigged game. Because what was once a survival strategy is now a wall between you and the truth. They weren't the enemy. They were another version of you, trying to make sense of a system that punished connection and rewarded performance. And that's what we'll unpack next. What happens when one child breaks the cycle and the others aren't ready to follow? Parents don't hire babysitters. They cast children. And in narcissistic family systems, those roles come with script, stage direction, and psychological chains. This section peels back the layers on the sibling roles and shows how each one was a trap, not a choice, not love. If you were the rebel, the loud one, the problem, you were the scapegoat. When the parent needed a target for their failure, criticism, or insecurity, you received it. It didn't matter if you spoke truth or protested. Your value was in being blamed. You drained the poison so they didn't have to feel it or admit their part in it. But over time, you internalized the narrative. I am the problem, even though all you did was exist. If you were the star, the one who could do no wrong, you were the golden child. Your successes proved their competence. Your obedience validated their parenting. But you weren't rewarded for being you. You were rewarded for being useful. And when you faltered, or expressed a need, or disappointed them, the pedestal vanished. And so did you, because your existence was tethered to their reflection. If you became quiet, invisible, you were the lost child. It wasn't because you were awkward or shy, it was survival. Silence equals safety. If you spoke, you risked conflict. If you played, you risked stealing someone else's praise. You learned to fade to preserve peace. But fading erased you. Your emotions, your needs, your voice, silently sacrificed for the illusion of calm. Each child in a narcissistic household becomes a function, not a person. You're not valued for who you are, only for what role you serve. That's why you don't just remember roles, you became them. You internalized the scripts, the emotional choreography, the distortions. You learned to stay exactly as needed. Outspoken if you were the scapegoat. Perfect if you were the golden child. Hidden if you were the lost child. Philosophically speaking, a role is a mirror, but not of you. It's of what they needed you to be. As Sartre reminded us, man is condemned to be free, but children in narcissistic families feel condemned to be assigned. They didn't offer freedom, they offered function. Think back to your childhood. Which role did you play, and how did it shape what you believed about yourself? The loud truth-teller? The golden achiever? The silent protector of peace? These descriptions don't end in childhood. They linger. They shape your adult struggles. If you were the scapegoat, maybe confrontation still makes your body tremble. If you were the golden child, perfectionism might still shadow you. If you were the lost child, intimacy might still terrify you. Because these roles aren't relics, they're survival blueprints. And worst of all, they often collide in your head. Perhaps you dared to step outside your role. Maybe you cracked the script. You fought back, or stopped performing, or finally spoke. So you grew, but in their eyes, you became dangerous, and they responded with more division, more roles, more sabotage. Let's go deeper. What happened the last time you tried to exist beyond your assigned role? And what message did that send to your nervous system? You didn't choose to become a role. You adapted. But now, you can choose to unbecome it. That journey isn't about changing of them. It's about rediscovering you. Because beyond the scapegoat, beyond the golden child, beyond the lost child, there is a self that wasn't invited to the system. And in the next section, we'll explore how the tension between siblings becomes a field for healing, if they're ready, and if you're ready to stop fighting each other and start fighting the pattern. You weren't mad at your sibling, at least not at first. You were angry at the pain, the injustice, the constant tension that hovered over the house. But you couldn't direct that anger at the one truly responsible. So you aimed it at the one closest to you, the one who shared your blood and your burden. That's how siblings became scapegoats to each other, long before a parent ever forced the division. You blamed them for getting more attention, for being easier, for being mum's favorite. You resented them for their grades, their charisma, their ability to disappear when the furnace of blame flashed. It felt like defense. You saw their success as a threat to your survival, not knowing the threat was always the system, never the sibling. This dynamic wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. As that narrative set in, it rewrote your childhood. The space for empathy collapsed. Shared laughter became guarded. Confidences were withheld. You might have avoided having deep conversations, because what started as sorrow became suspicion. You learned not to trust. The world taught you that your own sibling could be your rival, your competition, the very obstacle between you and the love you craved. In this space, memories become warped. You remember the tears, the arguments, the fights. What you forget is how often you both tried to reach across the divide before the parent rewrote the script. Sometimes there were moments, brief flickers, when you comforted each other or planned together, only to be interrupted by a roll of their eyes or a private reprimand. Those moments of connection vanished because connection threatened the system. This manipulation hurts the most because it's invisible. You don't realize you're trapped in a web until you try to escape and find yourself breathing alone. When you finally start to question, you might even ask yourself, did I push them away? Did I hide or lash out? Were the moments you blame them for actually windows into a broken system you both shared? It gets messier in adulthood. One sibling succeeds, and you feel a quiet shift in gravity. Your heart twists before your tongue forms the words. Or your sibling hurts, and you feel relief instead of compassion, surprised by the betrayal in your own chest. You might avoid calls, skip birthdays, stay off their social media. You might sit at the holiday table, confiding in everyone except them, because opening your mouth brings the memory of that invisible script back. Still, there's something undeniable buried underneath. Regret. A longing for what was never allowed to flourish. A question that haunts you. Did we ever have a chance? What did you secretly resent your sibling for, before you realized the pain belonged to both of you, not to them? Philosophically, Nietzsche believed that shared suffering doesn't divide you, it binds you. But in narcissistic systems, that bond is buried, so you end up grieving each other. The closeness you never had becomes a silence that echoes across birthdays and family gatherings. You think the blame is theirs, but really, it's the system that stole the chance of unity. So what now? This is where the pieces begin to shift. It doesn't matter who apologized last. It doesn't matter who broke the silence. What matters is seeing the wound for what it is, and refusing to bleed into it any longer. You and your sibling don't need permission to rewrite the narrative. You don't need them to be perfect. You just need them to remember you existed before the script began. Despite all the tension, all the blame, there remains something buried under years of silence and strategy, a suppressed longing for reconnection. It's not weakness, it's evidence of something better that never had a chance. And when that longing sneaks up on you, during a late-night scroll, a family gathering, or just a quiet moment, you realize how hard it is to dismantle the system, not just in your head, but in your heart. Because reconnection isn't about forgiving or forgetting. It's about unraveling a story you both inherited. Even when you do take the step, you bring with you the old roles like armor. You present your polished self or half-truths, scanning for signs they might judge or perform. The sibling you once secretly comforted becomes a stranger again. And just like that, you're right back at the wall. Philosopher Simone de Beauvoir once said that to be oneself is the task of a lifetime. But what if your sense of self was built on borrowed identities? Then every attempt to reconnect starts with unlearning who you were told to be. The emotional weight of that is heavy. Regret and grief press down. You miss the potential of that relationship, but you're also terrified of its cost. You wonder if reaching out will reopen wounds you've struggled to heal. If you step closer, will the past unravel all the progress you've made? Those questions aren't paranoia, they're clarity. They're still educated worry signals set off by years of division. And until those signals stop screaming, you won't be able to move in peace. If reconnection feels impossible, that's not failure. That's evidence of how deeply the narcissistic family dynamic worked. But it doesn't mean reconciliation is out of reach. It just means the road toward genuine connection runs through uncharted territory. Grief for what never had a chance, permission to feel messy, and the willingness to rewrite the script together. But only when both of you are ready. Because this isn't about forcing peace, it's about building it, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, And yes, someone has to try first. In the next section, we'll shift to what that first step could look like, and how you reclaim hope without losing yourself in false expectations. Even before you saw the problem, you sensed something was missing. It wasn't competition you craved. It was belonging, not a trophy, just trust. Not to win, but to walk through life knowing someone had your back. That is what you needed. Not perfection, not rebellion, not invisibility, but the freedom to exist side by side without scripts or safety nets. What if your sibling had been someone you could lean into, not against? What if you had been encouraged to argue, to disagree, yet still be loved? That's the vision few are offered, but the one you deserved. To know your sibling as another human being, not a rival or a reflection of parental needs. It's the difference between coexistence and alliance. You deserved a home where emotion wasn't a currency, where tears didn't compel punishment, and where competing for love wasn't the only path to safety. You needed permission to be messy together, to hold each other accountable without being pitted against each other, to learn that boundaries belong to both of you, not to the parent who brokered your relationship. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas taught that responsibility to the other is the root of ethics, seeing them as separate, vulnerable beings, and acknowledging your role in their suffering. That kind of care doesn't come from forcing closeness. It comes from genuine curiosity and a willingness to speak kindness before criticism and permit space before judgment. Rewiring sibling connection begins here with imagination, the permission to hold complexity, to comfort and challenge, to sit with neither of you being enough and still being loved. Healing doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in small resistances to old roles. A check-in text, a listening ear, a question that shows you're still interested in who they are now, not who they were cast to be. What you needed wasn't faultless reconciliation. It was an invitation into mutual humanity. You needed to be witnessed, not with expectations, but with empathy. You needed validation for your pain, not guilt. And you needed to recognize their pain too, not as your burden, but as theirs. This isn't just sibling repair. It's system interruption. It's saying no to the script that carved your bond into scarcity, and yes to a new story, one where you both can exist side by side in the same universe without competing for oxygen. When you do that, something unexpected happens. You reteach your nervous systems how to breathe around each other. Because what began as survival becomes currency no longer. It becomes a choice. Healing from sibling wounds doesn't depend on them, it depends on you. And that's what makes this act of breaking the pattern both terrifying and liberating. Freedom doesn't begin with conversations you still can't have. It begins the moment your nervous system settles without needing their permission. This is your liberation, even if they stay in the story you abandoned. When you decide to stop performing old roles, quietly, internally, in private, you begin a subtle revolution. You stop scanning for betrayal. You stop rehearsing safety. You say what's true, even if they're still reading from the old script. Philosopher Simone Weil said that attention, bestowed without the expectation of return, is the purest form of generosity. The same applies here. You can offer your sibling genuine curiosity, empathy, and presence, even without reciprocity, even if they answer with distance or defensiveness. Because generosity to them isn't a weakness, it's a declaration. It says, I'm free from the cage we were both edited into. This isn't about peace talks. It's about ending the internal war. It means you're dissolving your stake in the emotional economy of blame, resentment, and conditional care. You don't need to wait for their apology. You don't need to see change that may never come. You need only to refuse the old terms, to declare yourself outside the illusion. What does that look like in practice? It might look like accepting an invitation to connect without replaying old trauma. It could be as small as a message, not to fix, just to signal, I'm no longer playing the role. It might be choosing kindness over reaction. It might also mean noticing the rage when they don't reciprocate, and letting yourself feel it, letting it land without replay. Most importantly, it means being okay with ambivalence. It means doing the internal work that no one else can do for you, parenting your own nervous system when it screams that they're still untrustworthy. Their silence doesn't define you anymore. You validate yourself in the absence. Because when you break the pattern, even quietly, you rewrite legacy. You redirect the trajectory that once bound you both. This isn't reconciliation so much as emancipation. You're saying, I don't need to protect us by hating them, and that alone cracks the foundation. It might not feel like enough. It might feel like surrender. But surrendering to resentment is not freedom. Freedom comes when you wake up without guilt for wanting peace. When you notice the old alarm bells and choose to breathe past them. When you redefine closeness, not as a reward, but as an option. Even if they never cross that emotional border with you, your freedom is intact. Because the moment you stop negotiating your existence through their lens, you become your own ally. You step off the emotional ledger. You stop trading worth for love. You stop waiting for proof. You step into a space where your worth isn't conditional. Not on performance, not on comparison, not on their approval. If this feels like a turning point for you, pause for a moment. Let that responsibility settle. You don't need to schedule forgiveness. You just need to reclaim your right to peace. Because the final step in any healing journey isn't fixing the other. It's forging yourself. Consider leaving a short comment, not to explain, not to resolve, but simply to express. I'm here. I'm trying. That's enough. That's brave. That's liberation.